Chapter 12. The Horror and the Tree.
There is geometry in the humming of strings. There is music in the spacing of the spheres.
Pythagoras. I don't know if that was the right dialect or not. It's all Greek to me. The light of the cylinder affected him the moment its infernal hues silhouetted Ethan. Waves upon waves came at him without intermission. The violet and green took him. It was like being on a roller coaster of pleasure and terror, a thrill in his gut and a black fire in his mind. The colors were bright and neon and terrible, and came together in swirling cacophony. He smelled everything and nothing, tasted bitterness and sweetness, felt wetness across his skin, and found himself in the midst of a mad parade, a parade of all people in all times and all things, moving forward as one, dancing to a lilting waltz of music made of strange dark chords, grinning like the devil and laughing without mirth. It was a road that twisted and turned, headed straight into a fiery sun. The road undulated, going up and going down, and moving all on its own. Words came to Ethan's mind, strange words he could not understand, and yet somehow could. They were the lyrics of a mantra, of a song, of a mandate, of a revelation, of a canard, limbed in liminal wild. Let's all ride the caravan. Let's all see the show. Let's make up a gilded chart that tells us where to go. Let's write proverbs pushing lies that make no sense in any way. Maybe fiction says the truth much more than truth can say. Let's compel ourselves into believing love's a sham. Let's make truth its opposite, because who gives a damn? Let's justify everything. Let's make no right and wrong. Let's give vent to all desire. One more time sing the song, because if there is no wrong, then anything is okay. And if that is the state of things, nothing matters anyway. 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 The music kept getting louder and faster and stranger. The lyrics became increasingly involved, describing in detail a variety of dark activities, but doing so with a manic sort of emotional laughter as the waves came and went. Nothing about it was sincere, but the situation couldn't be ignored either. They would go high on the path, and things felt right. Ethan felt at one, as though he were all things in all places, joining with a crack squad of enlightened masters to play merry tricks on the world. In the crowd, dancing and gesticulating and grinning madly, he saw Douglas, the old man, and as he danced he began to take on the character of linen in the wind, and his hair began to slowly fall from his head. On Ethan's other side was Farley, often walking with his arms behind him, making wild guffawing noises, eyes wide, pupils huge, staring at an endless sky of supernovae in all colors, legs pitched forward in an odd bow-legged gait, drooling. But then he was riding some sort of flying dragon horse in circles, and then he was crawling on the ground and made of green. In front of Ethan, the wave went down, as did the strange and cackling caravan. This time, instead of undulating road, Ethan saw darkness, rounded darkness, and it separated itself, becoming two pools equally distant, but centered before Ethan. They were surrounded by snow, like moon dust in gray drifts, and there was an empty bench under the pools, rather like a mouth. In fact, the image seemed to be speaking and had a face-like quality to it, though no mouth movement was seen near the bench. There was a puppy, a cute puppy, walking up the road toward Ethan from the gray bench with the black pools like eyes. The caravan parted to either side, and it was just him and the cute puppy, all fluff, some sort of husky variety. The face vista behind the puppy saying,
Kick it hard, make it fly. How hilarious to die in surprise. How delightful in its arc, how insightful in its cry, and how it will learn furthermore to never trust the man-shaped sword, fickle in his head again as the dark comes round the bend, and so to death keep
itself from the broken, evil health that rotteth twisted world. Kick the puppy, boot the mutt, cleave its doggy soul. Ethan grinned, eyes wide, legs bowed out, and started sauntering over to do just that, appearing in his mind as that famous picture of John Lennon with Yoko Ono on one hand and a cowboy hat over his head. Without warning, Ethan saw something on the road to his right. A thin little trail, and there was a steady, pure, unbroken light coming from it, as from a street light made of poignant sunset. And a man sat in the midst of a lonely bench that was no mouth, beside the trail. And this man had the saddest eyes. Ethan felt the whole topsy-turvy world begin to shuffle. The road began to shake. And the thought voice came at him again. Where is the joke in the non-shifting road? Where is the joy? Make the dog do the flight! Ethan replied, but it's a more funny joke to do something you can't see coming. No cap! The man with sad eyes nodded, and Ethan realized there was a light in them that was not sad. It was something more, and that drew him too. The puppy whimpered and disappeared. Now there was a wind against him, pushing, a cold wind. The road had become its undulating self once more, but instead of a fiery, blazing star, there was a stationary path rolling up under him like a carpet, ever out of his reach, forever intangible, and yet upon which his exit depended. Even so, when he looked on it, the negative thrill was gone, and it was this thought that brought another wild wave. Terrible fear came upon Ethan, the worst he'd ever known. He was being pulled down into it. It was in his blood, across his skin, through every hair, in his very eyes. Inhaling was terror. Exhaling was horrific. The colors turned from neon to putrefaction, but all except the distant path would spin and spin and spin. That mind voice came again, dark as obsidian, smooth as silk. You must embrace the chaos, it suggested. Look into the fear. Accept the terrorizing. Let it wash you clear. Become one with the horror. Look into the fear! He had a vision of himself standing at the edge of a precipice and giving in to that tiny voice that told him to jump off, of skipping from the sidewalk into noonday traffic, jumping out of the plane without the parachute, taking the chance in a crowd with a random woman, catching the cash truck at just the right instant behind the bank, setting fire just to see the flames. That was the horror. Knowing the wrongness of something, knowing the signs, the warning, diving into it anyway, embracing the thrill of the terror, of the wrong, and setting the soul ablaze so the world could follow suit. Perhaps it was all being laid on a little thick. Ethan wasn't so philosophically developed that these things immediately convinced. Rather, they confused him. He wasn't really able to grasp any of what was going on. It was a nightmare, and he found he was even running as fast as his legs would carry him. But the fiends of the night with eyes of blood kept howling behind, waiting at every interstice of every hallway, of every doorway, as they kept coming at him. And he turned, but they were there. And now he was in water, swimming through the deep, toward the light so far, yet bright despite its distance. He cast a glance behind, and a scarlet maw greeted him, devouring all in its wake. Ethan tried to scream, but could not breathe for the water, and it all kept closing in, until his mouth was full of bits of fingernails, and he would spit them out, but there were always more, and now his teeth became fingernails as they dripped into his mouth, filling his gums and getting under his tongue, and he spit them out and grabbed them from his mouth and pulled and threw them and screamed, but they kept growing and multiplying. He had become a wheel, a gear in a machine of neon colors, marching as the caravan, each gear playing its exact role, enslaved without will to its perpetual destiny within the ridiculous hilarity terror complex. Somehow he could see out beyond the machine into the factory floor, where there was a door in the wall marked break room. It was the source of the soft, steady light that somehow bled through despite the madness. Ethan detached himself from the machine's anthropomorphized Technicolor assembly line. He rolled to the break room, and as he tumbled, his colorful gear-shaped ridges became arms and legs and a head, and he was walking like normal again. Soon he saw the man with the sad electric eyes before him. The man sat at a table under gentle yellow light and said, "Wouldn't you like to rest?" "I would like to rest so much," replied Ethan, closing the break room door behind and eagerly taking the only other chair in the room. "How do you get rest?" asked the man. I don't know." "If a peak is very tall, do you think it will have a valley which is more deep or more shallow?" "Deep, yes." "You are not at the peak, Ethan. At the peak is rest for a time. Higher peaks remain. I will show you how to overcome." Now a new vision came to Ethan. It was a range of mountains growing ever wider and ever taller and ever deeper and ever more wild. Each peak had a view on the world slightly higher than the last, and slightly more of the reality was revealed. In Ethan's mind, he knew the vision was not a vision or one-to-one reality. It was some analogy or parable. The peaks were accomplishments, development, growth, learning to transcend. They were milestones and more. Every time he scaled one, a trail followed after, and like water down a crevice, mankind followed the trail. Then Ethan saw a tree, a grand tree larger than he'd ever imagined. He realized he was part of the tree, a small branch far from the trunk and reaching outwards. There were many branches, fathers, mothers, uncles, cousins, all one family, all one tree, growing from a seed to a sapling to fullness. The tree was mankind. There was a gardener nearby, and branches overcome with mold, lichen, or rot were pruned away. Those which were unable to produce fruit were trimmed from those which did. This allowed the healthy members of the tree to grow stronger. And the tree grew and it grew and it became larger and greater than any tree Ethan could see or had seen or was able to conceive. The depth of its green pulled him in until the branches became water, and the water became pools, and the pools became eyes, and the eyes were full of great joy, but they were eyes that had known the greatest sorrow. Ethan was back in the break room again. He stumbled backward out of the chair, then tremblingly slumped back into it, exhaling incredulously. "Where am I?" "Where I have brought you, Ethan. Will you follow me, or will you become a part of the machine? You are Jesus." It hit Ethan like a shockwave. In the same instant, and this will be hard to understand, Ethan realized he couldn't actually see the man. He couldn't actually see his face. He could feel what was going on. He could feel the room. But now it wasn't a room. He was lying somewhere, but the man, the Christ, God, was there. "I am," he replied. "Do you believe that I am?" "Yes." "Will you follow me? Will you abandon the horror? Are you sorry you ever entertained it?" Ethan felt himself nodding. "Yes, I will. I will follow. I'll abandon the horror. I'm ashamed. It seemed like a good idea." Awake, Ethan came to himself. His eyes were open and full of sludge. Something was in his mouth. Something was all the way down his throat. Ethan went to pull at it, but he couldn't get his arms to move. Not immediately. They were under some sort of thin, wet layer, like a gelatin or something. Very similar. There was little to see. He could make out grayness and polygonal organization above his head, a ceiling in a dark room. He blinked again. It was reflective. Everything around him was reflective. A room made of mirrors. Was he yet in the dream? Ethan pulled, and his right arm came free. It took effort. He felt as though were he suspended upside down, it'd be hardly any trouble for that sort of restraint to keep him from falling. His arm was numb. He shook it for a moment and flexed his hand. Then he used his tingling fingers to free his left and then pull the tube out of his mouth. It yanked something from his nose as well, and immediately he vomited, falling over in the process and feeling things become forcibly extracted from his arm. He vomited again and found himself on hands and knees trembling, looking at his own pale and terrified face in the reflective floor. Where had he seen this floor before? It was reflective, but the texture, it looked like it was the floor in the basement of the dacha, that dacha of Carl's, but polished to a shine. It was like some sort of metal, but this wasn't that place at all, was it? Ethan pushed himself to his knees, standing shakily. He still had his clothes. They had merely been submerged in that goop, whatever it was, the Swiss cheese jelly. It was all over him. He'd been on a platform the width of a man that was a little more than knee-height, and all the tubes he had pulled from his face were connected directly to the wall, which, when he incidentally touched that wall, collapsed like foam and trembled, sending out a violet pulse of energy. But it was yet reflective, everything reflected, filling the room with an ambient purple light. A jolt of fear hit Ethan as he remembered the undulations when he had incidentally touched a wall with Carl before. But somewhere a voice seemed to tell him not to be afraid, and he remembered those walls had not been reflective, had they? It was something a little different. The room he was in was circular and had no light source he could determine except the endless reflections from the curving mirrors. There were 3 doors, one door directly across from Ethan, and 2 to either side, but apparently inaccessible owing to the position of the room's other occupants, Douglas and Farley. They were also on the platforms, and their faces were covered in tubes. Additionally, the white, strong gelatin goop, thin as a slice of cheese, was over them as well. What was unsettling were their eyes. Both men had their eyes wide open. Douglas had massive handfuls of hair missing from his skullet. Farley was also losing hair. Ethan felt his own head, but there didn't seem to be any loss. He had more beard stubble than he was used to, though. How long had he been in that state? He blinked, feeling adrenaline start to wake his brain. The man from his dream, the words came to him. "Follow me," said the voice. Ethan looked at the door, almost a mirage against the eye-squinting reflectivity of the vessel, and walked to it. As soon as he was near, it split in two and retreated into the innards of this place. It had a creepy living vibe, as though it were some portion of a heart's valve, as seen through a miniature invasive camera, but silhouetted in a metallic silver. Buford was there behind the door, looking directly at him, eyes black, grinning like the devil. "The dream's not done, little Ethan." He slammed his hand into the wall of the room, and there was a disorienting motion like waves. Distantly, Ethan heard a deep noise. "Now, let's get you back in bed." Buford started to grow in size as he came toward Ethan. The violet light of the space became more luminous. An unexpected impediment interrupted Buford's advance. A golden light, bright as day, suddenly lit everything up. Whatever it was knocked Buford into infrastructure Ethan couldn't quite see in the area beyond. With a loud metallic sound, punctuated by a groan, Buford was unconscious. His head must have hit something. In the distance, Ethan could see a twisting foot. The light became a substantial creature with insane kaleidoscopic wings and 4 faces, staring ferociously to the north, south, east, and west. But then said creature condensed into a man, and the man's glow diminished until Ethan could see the being without squinting, at which point he said, "I am your guardian. You are not supposed to be here, but now you have the Comforter in you, and now you have a legal right over this fallen co-worker of mine." Here the being smacked the reflective bulkhead of the ship with an open palm. A wave of energy reverberated through the texture of the vehicle's structure, and the vessel noticeably shivered, if that's the right word to call such wild vibration. Ethan looked around excitedly, planting his feet until the motion ceased. He turned back to the bright being. "Are you Are you a messenger, angel, guardian? Many terms describe me. You should not know me in the corporeal realm, not except fleetingly, incidentally, and without true recognition. But we are not in the corporeal now. We are somewhere you are not supposed to be. Even so, you have been brought here for a reason. It was not your intention to be here. It was your weakness that brought you. But this will be made strength. Why? Why am I here? I'm an IT guy. I want to go home. Can you help me get the girl? Is she here? Do you have a name? I am Malkuthel. The girl you know is Chloe, but who is Claire, is not in these innards, as are you. Even so, she is not far. Your talents, and the destiny around them, are why you've been brought here as you have. You are already on your way to the true home. Ethan looked behind at Douglas and Farley. Can they get out? Well, the bald one about my age, I mean, he's not a bad cat. The other guy, to remove them now would be to trap them in that mad death caravan until their mortal bodies transition to the next existence. They will become as Buford. Here Malkuthel jerked his head toward the inert body behind him that he had knocked into unconsciousness like a football made of light. They will be marionette slaves. Still, even old Buford may yet have a chance while he lives, however slim. He has given in to the horror. He has looked into the abyss and allowed it to look into him. And now the thrill of the broken is all he knows. That is what is happening to them as they sleep with their eyes open. They are now in a place where they must choose the hard path, but the right path, as you have. Many in that state will not choose the hard path as opposed to the path of pleasure and self-satisfaction. The same was being done to you, Ethan. They were teaching you to embrace the broken, to find pleasure in the pain of terror, in the instability of chaos, the aggrandizement of self. Ethan felt his heart begin to pound. It was awful. But it wasn't all awful, was it? That's the worst. No cap. That's the worst part. I was like about to drop kick a puppy. They started with a puppy. Very cutthroat, even more than they were. The time energies they ingest are corrupting them deeper and deeper. Well, be that as it may. Ethan, I'm your guardian. I'm your protector as long as this assignment lasts. I can't do things for you, but I can help. Now, you might even be able to help that girl. But you can't decide for her. I'm like a ref in a game. When the rules are broken, a whistle is blown. But in a rare circumstance, you didn't choose the caravan. You didn't choose the machine. You didn't let the false representation of divine geometry compel you into becoming a villain, a slave, surviving on synthetic pleasure while your soul melts. That's rare, Ethan. But there are so many like you, so many who do not know who they are or what they are. You will help them know. No cap. Ha! Maybe you'll be able to save the girl, but you can't decide for her. Okay, what am I supposed to do? Ethan was in a bit of a daze, but after the terror of the nightmare mindscape and the change in his circumstances regarding the Guardian, he was feeling a hope. Shortly after you were taken, that young man there was himself taken from the corporeal realm. He pointed to Douglas, who twitched obligingly. It has been some time in the corporeal realm. You have been in your time for a long time. Weeks, maybe. When Buford found you awake, he signaled the phase transition to alter physical restraints by switching dimensional surroundings, thus facilitating easier reintegration. He brought you back from the corporeal to the building place, what you call the world between worlds. But he did not know that the Comforter now resides within you spiritually, and now different rules apply. So I am here, and this broken conscious messenger you call a ship has skipped a beat. And now what you must do, Ethan, is travel all the way to the front of the vessel. Where is its top? For there is its mind. Its mind. And so its control center, and the amplification space, where your own spiritual resonance can come into agreement, and so manipulate this vessel. But as you go, You will meet the spiritual automata, wearing suits of gray and eyes of black. These will strike fear in your heart, the darkest you have known. Do not be afraid. This is told you because you must remember. You must remember consciously, or indeed you will become afraid. But they cannot hurt you. Grab one, fight one. You will see. And when you see, as you come to understand, you will grow in faith. And as you grow in faith, you will transcend from glory to glory. Ethan swallowed, felt a thrill, and an anticipation of sorts, despite the monstrous prospect before him. He said, "How do I get to the top front, or the front top, or what it was?" Malkuthal nodded. "Through that door, you will see a central room like the dacha. You remember? Yes, that cabin in the woods Carl said is Siberia. It is Siberia. There were stairs. They seemed out of place, yes? I didn't know what to expect to begin with. Those stairs would spiral up and up and up, but they stopped on one floor. That cabin, Ethan, that dacha, it is one section of a great serpent, though not a serpent as this, rather, an older, a ground-bound thing. What is important is this. Each section can be independent of the whole, even though all act as one sequence, like vertebrae in a spine, a sort of fail-safe of collective engineering on the spiritual side of things. Ethan was taken aback. Whoa, but I thought, it's wood, ain't it? Carl's place in Siberia? Trim. Trim? Wood, for aesthetic purposes, applied atop other building materials. Ethan nodded. He looked at the metal floor, imagined it with wood over the top, then looked back at Malkuthal. So I just gotta, climb to the top? It will be a journey, Ethan. However, you must not falter. You must not return down here to this lowest level of the living vessel, and you must overcome. Why can't you help me? Because a bicycle that always has training wheels cannot reach its fullest velocity. I am here to direct, to help, to guide. I am not here to do for you. Also, a shift comes, and the dimension of the world between worlds we are in now will change, limiting what I am able to do. Fam, I ain't even used training wheels yet. You're about to, and Malkuthal flat disappeared. Suddenly that feeling of disorienting waves shocked the vessel, and Ethan had to reach out so he didn't stumble, falling right into the wall and sending countless ripples of energy out over its mirrored mass. It was the same feeling as earlier when Buford had done whatever it was he did to communicate with whoever controlled the ship. He'd slapped the wall. Ethan hit it again, but the ripples didn't return. There was some mystery of communication at play here. He made a mental note to avoid the walls as best he could. The angel had disappeared. He was no longer in the world between worlds. He was in the vessel, in his world. Ethan took a deep breath and walked out of the little room into the central area. Instead of a kitchen island and a wood stove like in the dacha, there was some sort of infrastructure that looked like it had a control function. Behind it was the spiral staircase as advertised, spinning up and away into the height of the craft. Everything was reflective and almost perfectly so, such that strange lights came from strange places, and all was disorientation. Ethan felt he could see creatures in the reflection, so he focused on the inert form of Buford where nothing made his eyes hurt. Hadn't the cylinder been horizontal? How could gravitation inside the thing be different than outside of it? Orientation inside should have been like a submarine, but it was more like a rocket. Buford, unconscious and breathing raggedly, had a thin trail of blood leading to him. That blood continued over a naked metal rail following the stairs. It was thick around where Buford had impacted. The steps made a wide corkscrew. The rail was featureless. It had a grip for the hands, but was curiously low and bearing widely spaced supporting struts. It had ample space between each supporting strut, through which falling would be very easy. Stairs, rail, and struts were all reflective, with a violet hue. Ethan stepped over Buford gingerly and looked up into the endless reflective spiral from the bottom. Infinite black eyes bobbed and weaved in faces of gray like the backs of a billion beetles constituting a maw of madness in the purple shadows above. They moved like birds, like owls without feathers, and a stench of rot permeated down. Ethan feared.